Right now, you might be eating foods that are literally feeding cancer cells in your body, not because you're trying to, but because some of the most common foods we consider normal or even healthy are quietly creating the perfect environment for cancer to grow. Here's the reality. About 40% of us will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in our lifetime. Much of it comes down to genetics and bad luck. But here's the good news. Up to 40% of all cancers are preventable. You can't change your genetics, but you absolutely can influence how your genes behave. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is through the food you eat every day. Because cancer isn't just a genetic disease, it's also a metabolic disease and an immune function disease. And today, we're breaking down the science behind how certain foods feed cancer cells and giving you a simple framework to avoid them. Section 1. How cancer actually works. First, let's set the foundation. Cancer starts when a normal cell becomes abnormal, just a single mutation, which happens all the time. But for that mutated cell to survive and spread, it needs several things to fall into place. Cancer cells need glucose as their primary energy source. They need hormones like insulin and IGF-1 to activate growth pathways. They require inflammation, which breaks down barriers and suppresses your immune system, your first line of defense against cancer. And finally, they need a blood supply through a process called angiogenesis, which provides new blood vessels to feed them nutrients. Unfortunately, many foods in our modern diet directly support every single one of those steps. But the good news? We can use this knowledge to our advantage. We can choose to either feed cancer or fight it. Section 2. The hidden carcinogen, aflatoxins. Let's start with one of the most potent, naturally occurring carcinogens, aflatoxins. These are toxins produced by certain molds that grow on grains, nuts, and corn. The foods to be most careful with are peanuts and tree nuts like almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. Now, let me be clear, nuts are not bad for you, but we need to be careful about where they come from. Nuts from humid, warm countries are more prone to mold contamination, and indirect exposure can come through peanut butter or almond butter made from nuts that weren't thoroughly inspected. To minimize this risk, look for brands that don't source from humid regions. Inspect nuts carefully and avoid ones that are discolored or shriveled. Eat them within a month of purchasing and check expiration dates. Roasting peanuts and pistachios can reduce aflatoxin content, though it doesn't eliminate it completely. Here's a sneaky one. Aflatoxins can also enter our diet indirectly through milk and dairy. Some animals consume aflatoxin-contaminated feed, and a specific type called M1 can be secreted in milk. Be especially careful with milk from cows, fed untested grain, or unregulated raw dairy products. Section 3. Sugar, cancer's favorite fuel. No surprise here, but foods high in sugar and processed carbohydrates are linked to increased cancer risk, especially breast, colon, and possibly pancreatic cancer. Here's why. Imagine your body is made of trillions of tiny engines, your cells. Normally, these engines burn fuel efficiently using oxygen. But cancer cells are like broken engines. They burn through fuel incredibly fast, and their favorite fuel is glucose, the sugar your body makes from breads, pasta, kenda, and soda. This is partly explained by the Warburg effect, where cancer cells burn sugar super quickly, even when there's plenty of oxygen around. They don't care about efficiency, they just want to grow fast. When you eat foods that spike your blood sugar, your body releases insulin and IGF-1, normally good hormones, but in excess, they send a message to cells, it's time to grow bigger and divide. So you get a double whammy. You're feeding cancer cells their preferred fuel and increasing the signals that tell them to multiply. In breast cancer, some studies show cancerous cells can have 6 times more insulin receptors than healthy cells. And if that wasn't bad enough, excess sugar leads to chronic inflammation, which causes DNA damage and weakens your immune system. The bottom line, cancer cells are sugar hungry. So limit sugar as much as possible, especially processed and high glycemic carbohydrates. Instead, emphasize low glycemic options with high-fiber beans, whole grains, vegetables, and berries. And if you drink regular soda, switch today to tea, water, or even diet soda. Section 4. Processed and red meat. This topic requires nuance because the science isn't as black and white as headlines suggest. Tons of studies show an association between high intake of processed meats, ham, bacon, sausages, hot dogs, and red meat like pork, beef, or lamb with cancers, especially colorectal cancer. But these are observational studies showing association, not causation. It's hard to tease out whether people who ate more processed meat also smoked more or exercised less, or whether people who ate less processed meat had better access to healthcare, what's called healthy user bias. That said, there are mechanistic reasons why these meats may cause cancer. Many processed meats contain nitrites, preservatives that turn into nitrosamines in your stomach, a known carcinogen linked to stomach cancer. How we cook meat also matters. Grilling, frying, or barbecuing at high temperatures creates chemicals called HCAs and PAHs, compounds shown to damage DNA and promote cancer in animal studies. Here's my take. Looking at the totality of evidence, I'm not entirely convinced it's the red meat itself causing cancer, but rather the absence of what that extra meat replaces. When you eat more red meat, you're probably eating less fiber-rich foods, fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, and we have numerous studies showing higher dietary fiber intake is linked to lower cancer risk and a 13% reduction in cancer mortality. You don't need to give up red meat or grilled meat, but don't overdo it. And definitely load up on fiber with every meal. Section 5. Alcohol. There's strong scientific evidence that alcohol causes cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classified alcohol as a Group 1 carcinogen back in 1987 due to sufficient evidence it causes cancer of the oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, liver, and is associated with breast and colorectal cancer. Alcohol leads to cancer in several ways. Your liver metabolizes it into acetaldehyde, a toxic compound that directly damages DNA and interferes with DNA repair. Alcohol also causes vitamin deficiencies, lower levels of B1, thiamine, critical for healthy mitochondrial function, and impaired absorption of folate, leading to DNA synthesis errors. On top of all that, alcohol acts as a solvent that enhances absorption of other carcinogens, like tobacco, into your tissues. This isn't a comprehensive list of all foods that cause cancer, but these are the major players backed by science. The key takeaway? Cancer cells need specific conditions to thrive: glucose, growth hormones, inflammation, and blood supply. And many foods in our modern diet provide exactly that. But you have power here. Every meal is a choice to either feed cancer or fight it. Choose wisely. Load up on fiber. Limit processed foods and sugar. Be mindful of alcohol. And don't let processed meats dominate your plate. Your body is resilient. Give it the right fuel, and it will fight for you.